In this week's session, we want to talk about pantheism. Now, pantheism is probably a term you're not too familiar with, so let's define it. Pantheism is the belief that everything that exists is of the same essence. So you and the chair you're sitting in, if you're sitting right now, and God are all made ultimately up of the same stuff. This is a belief that takes root in a lot of Eastern religions. So you'll meet Buddhists who are pantheists, or a lot of different versions of Hinduism will embrace pantheism. It's not the kind of thing where you're going to meet a friend on the street and they're going to introduce themselves as a pantheist. They'll introduce themselves as a pagan, a neo-pagan, or a Buddhist. In the same way, you wouldn't introduce yourself to your friend as a theist or monotheist, but as a Christian. So let's talk about what the Bible has to say about pantheism. And the better question is not necessarily what it says, but what it doesn't say. And what does the Bible reveal about this concept by not teaching it? So here's our first point. The Bible teaches that God is eternal. He had no beginning and no end. Here's what Psalm 92 says. Before the mountains were born, before you gave birth to the earth and the world, from beginning to end, you are God. And this phrase, from beginning to end, actually comes from a Hebrew word which means eternal. So it's talking about God's foreverness, his eternal nature. The New Testament picks up on this as well in Romans 1:20. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature. Unlike God, humans had a beginning. Check out Genesis 1. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And Genesis 2. Then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. He breathed the breath of life into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person. So the Bible does teach that humans are created by God in God's image. But that's very different from saying that we are of the same essence or made up of the same stuff as God. That's pantheism. Here's John 10. Once again, the Jewish leaders picked up stones to kill him. Jesus said, "At my Father's direction, I have done many things to help the people. For which of these good deeds are you killing me?" They replied, "Not for any good work, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, have made yourself God." So these Jews who were coming to kill Jesus, they were rightly dividing the Old Testament. They understood that humans are not God, and God is unique. And if Jesus wasn't who he claimed to be, then they were right to stone him for blasphemy. All throughout the Old Testament, we read about God's holiness, and that holiness shows how we are essentially different from him. We can't be like him. In fact, the whole sacrificial system of the Old Testament was meant to show the people on a daily basis that they are separate from God and they needed a redeemer. They needed someone to stand in the gap. Here's what it comes down to. We're essentially different from God. Yes, we're created in his image. Yes, he breathed life into us and he loves us, but we can never be like him. And that's okay. In fact, we should rejoice in that because our God exists outside of the limitations of this universe. He exists outside of time itself. And that means he's in control. And that means we can trust him. And that means we should rejoice.